happier than me, Paolo. I'll cover for you. It is all good, but I've pounded down about half this coffee now, and I am amped for this PVZ. And if for good reason, because we've got two awesome players. We'll quickly introduce in the top left. We have the blue Protoss. You know him, you love him, you hate the builds everybody's been using to cheese you with that he made for the last year. He's MaxPax.
I'm doing a MaxPax classic as well. It's 2 players and 2 probes to start things off. But in the bottom right-hand side, first to finish the intros quickly, it is the red dinosaur, the last of his kind. It's Denver for a pawn. All right, so actually it's just a probe for the block here, forcing Denver to take the low ground expand, just maybe taking the probe a little bit earlier than normal there, and using a second probe to do the gateway post pylon. So yeah, just normal stuff here from MaxPax, nothing too crazy.
Nothing earth-shattering, but talking about just going a little bit back to that Raynor interview. So fun to see the confidence coming back there. Yeah. I guess the confidence was probably always there, but interesting to kind of consider when we're looking at who these players are going to be going up against down the line. And obviously MaxPax and Denver, the winner of this series, is going to have a couple of very tough opponents to get through. As soon as Raynor dropped down to this bracket, both of these players, when the conversations were like, how far can they get? It immediately became, well, until they reach this point, right? And both of them have had a lot to prove, but I think that whoever wins this can't really be upset if it's harder to go much further than that, because we've really gotten to see just a great growth out of both Denver and MaxPax over the last few seasons, last couple of years, really. I remember when Denver was one of those guys that was like, oh, I'm qualified, I'm here in the group stage, but I'm now going to lose all my matches and not really, make it that far, not really make that big splash that you're possibly hoping for. And it has been awesome to see the rise of not only him, but also MaxPax, who is, as we've kind of beaten to death this horse, but he was originally known for the cheese, for the crazy stuff, but he executes those macro games beautifully nowadays.
Yeah, he kind of did it backwards, at least perceptually on that front, right? Like a lot of the players are usually honing their mechanics, and their kind of play styles are not really well developed until they reach high heights. Like we see now Serral mixing it up, we see Hero Marine mixing it up. We see a lot of the Europeans, though, first focusing on macro, on just getting their mechanics down. MaxPax is a player who has kind of been doing both things in tandem, and we still see that he has some weaknesses in terms of like army control and the likes, but as far as the creative aspects and as far as like being very intelligent with his transitions, with kind of his scouting, his information gathering, and the being consistent with his strategies, he's one of the very best already.
Yeah, and I do love to see that, right? You and I think we're kind of notorious for that, but we do love talking about when we get to see the players do these, do anything that's a little bit out the ordinary, a little bit interesting. Tries to go for the Evo block on the Adept, and okay, this is pretty. He does slow it down for now. I thought he was going to get that third drone kill very quickly, and I was going to say this is pretty devastating. 2 drones is still not what you want to lose. The Overlord gets popped by the Stalker from the low ground too. So he kind of went in there, was looking for a little bit more information, and was not able to keep it alive. So Denver will have to rebuild that Overlord. And to the credit of MaxPax, he puts that little bit of pressure on. He has the Stalker in the wall. 2 Adepts are going to get warped in behind it. You really don't want to lose the Stalker, but there's no battery. Oh my God,
yeah.
Actually pushes through. The Adepts were not enough to close it off. So a couple more buildings get warped in to create a secondary layer. A little airtight lock, Cats. This is usually where this little spray comes out to sanitize before you go into the lab. You need airlocked chambers in your Protoss wall. Not safe for Archons, by the way.
Definitely, and this is where Denver is so dangerous right now. He's so unpredictable, right? Like he made 14 Zerglings. Like you do not need that many Zerglings to answer the first 2 Adepts. So I mean, if he doesn't find damage in retaliation, he's gonna be behind. But he does find a little bit of damage. He does find a little bit of an opening. He forces a couple of buildings to be made, a couple of pylons to be made, and then be cancelled. And given that this is an Adept follow-up with Glaives for MaxPax, it takes the wind a little bit out of those sails, as a couple of Adepts more than he would have liked to lose have already been lost in this game. So MaxPax having to be a little bit cautious with this. Of course, there is going to be reinforcements coming up with this Warp Prism, but the timing is already a little bit off for MaxPax, right? You want to be hitting this build at around 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Not the case here.
Yeah, definitely not on the table. We did get to see MaxPax take a laser to 5 games yesterday, and I do believe we had a good amount of these adept builds, but they didn't always go into like this giga commit where it's like, okay, I'm gonna try to end it, but this time it does kind of feel a little bit that way. There's some infrastructure being built back home, but that's a lot of adepts shaded in.
That's a lot
with a prism.
That's a ton. I mean, it's a minute later, but it is 1 warp in extra as well, right? There's a lot of adepts, and Denver had the capabilities to make enough roaches that this shouldn't be an issue, but he didn't. He only made 2 roaches and 2 ravagers. The 2 ravagers don't really contribute too much unless a huge bile lands, but nice move there from MaxPax to mitigate. Now he's gonna try and get between those minerals so that the surface area for the Lynx is diminished. And actually, Denver does end up holding. He has made a lot of Zerglings, however, so has to be very, very careful, as those are not going to be able to trade very effectively against these adepts. And he has already lost 12 workers in the process, Nate.
He's just throwing away the adepts into him, just basically saying, I'm going to trade out for all of your workers, and getting him down to 28. And, you know, he got so many of the Zerglings in that natural mineral line earlier. Cats, all the larva is still just being spent on those on the Lynx. She tried, I was going to say, tried to get a few drones towards the end, but as soon as that happened, no, MaxPax was able to take a very quick game 1. I really like that play because, to me, this actually jumps out from yesterday's games. We had the Glaive Adept openings more than once for MaxPax against the laser, but the way that he ended up transitioning, he was always kind of quickly going into something else, either taking his 3rd base or basically saying, you're going to build a bunch of Lings and Roaches to defend against my Adepts, and then I'm not actually going to commit that much to it. And in this game, it was him saying, oh, you didn't really respect this build? Yes, I actually can just keep warping in Adepts and murder your face off if that's going to be the case. And you pointed this out too, because you're a god, Cats, but there are only 2 Ravagers. He didn't have any Roaches and just kept making Lings to fight Glaive Adepts, which I'm not sure there's any timeline or universe out there, parallel or otherwise, that's going to work.
Yeah, it's very difficult to imagine, and that might be a case of MaxPax also studying Denver or something of the likes. And I mean, you have to expect that the players at this stage have studied each other, but a lot of what Denver was doing in previous matches in this matchup was very Link-focused, Link-centric, right? Like a lot of his timings, even when he's going for those Queen walks or Queen Roach walks, it's been very Link-heavy compared to other players. So Adepts and Glaives are a wonderful choice against a Denver that is ultimately focusing on Lings a lot in this games. A Denver that already made a flood of Lings to answer the first 2 Adepts. And again, that is the unpredictability of Denver. But if he can't find openings with that unpredictability, then he's going to find himself in a very tough position. And we talked about it, MaxPax, one of the best players at making good decisions, one of the best players at gathering information. And if he has studied his opponent, I have to imagine even one of the best players at adapting preemptively. I'm trying to say, I guess, he's a very, very smart kid. And Denver, he's going to be looking for trickery, and his opponent should know that.
Yeah, could not agree any better. I think it's one of those situations where you don't want to read too much into your prep, because that first game kind of seemed served up if our Zerg had really thought too much about those matches against the laser. But we're loaded into Blackburn, which typically gives us its own funky variety of StarCraft. So without further ado, in the bottom left, we have the red Zerg player. He is Denver.
I'd love for him to take a gold base when his natural gets denied. We'll see if that's the case, as things will be unfolding. But first, in the bottom right-hand side of the map, it is the blue Protoss player, MaxPax. Denver will take his normal 3rd. That's pretty much everyone does, really.
Yeah. It's what was like? Is it like? Is there a scenario where he doesn't, or is it like you're just so used to doing it that people just plan around it normally now?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you want to send your drone a little bit sooner because you anticipate that the probe is going to be blocking that natural base expansion. But I think that Denver should try to make things as funky as possible. Taking a gold base early can be the type of thing that forces your opponent out on the aggression. And while it's not the easiest thing to defend, if you go for an early enough gas, I still think you're okay against Adepts. Obviously, Oracles and the likes can be something that become troublesome because you're going to be so spread in those bases. The transfer for the drones is going to be pretty far away. But that is the kind of thing that, you know, that is how you make the game funky. And I think that it's up to Denver to make the game funky, even though that is known to be one of MaxPax's strengths. Just because, yeah, I mean, the way that these 2 overlap, I don't know that Denver wants to take it late game either. MaxPax is very strong in the late game as well.
I was gonna say he's a kind of a terrifying guy. It'll just build a bunch of carriers because old MaxPax before he became the MaxPax that can win macro games against top Europeans. That's one of those things that you're like, okay, you kind of expect him to just sit back, chill, turtle up, but he's definitely had plenty of experience with those types of compositions, and I agree with you. It's tough though, right? Because Denver was the one that ended up losing the short game at the start here. And I do believe that could be a little bit of a mind game, since MaxPax yesterday showed a lot of non-committed adept builds. And Denver was like, oh, he's doing one of those non-committed adept builds. I'm fine. But turns out not the case. And we can kind of see that's where MaxPax's own mind games come into play. He's taken into account what he did yesterday, applied that to today's game, and now we'll have that Stargate booted up. But I think that if there's a map for it, this is one of the easiest ones to split in half.
Most certainly, yeah. I think MaxPax was playing his opponent in the previous map. That is a map that kind of... I love Lightshade because it kind of lends itself to a lot of different things. It's just it's a short map, which means early aggression can be good, etc., but it's also an open map come the mid game, so queen pushes are also pretty good, and just mid game aggression, like we saw last game from the Protoss player, can be pretty good, etc. This is more of a it's a very easy map to split. It's a map where air is going to be pretty strong, and that is mostly what we see MaxPax gravitate to. So here is a map where Denver could have studied his opponent and been like, okay, this is probably the most likely map for you to Stargate, just because it is such an easy map to Stargate on.
Yeah, and I think that makes a whole lot of sense. You have the direct, easy path right across the enemy base with your air units. You have a lot of choke points, so it's a little bit tougher to just try and swarm up and dive onto units like the Void Rays or the Oracles. And of course, you can take this third base a little bit towards the backside, and you've got to go right in front of that natural area, usually, to get there, which just makes it a little bit easier to consolidate your defensive forces. And as we all know, as long as the unit in the Protoss wall is on hold position, generally everything is okay in the early game.
Yes, indeed. Now, there's going to be an Oracle out here just looking to force out some static defense. Oh, the static defense is not yet done here, so he might find a couple of drones. It's just one for now for his troubles. No, going into the middle of that spore, though, taking a couple more shots that he might have liked to. Here comes the next Void Ray. Might be able to turn on Prismatic Alignment for that Overlord, but with 3 queens here, it will just be deflected for the time being. Still, MaxPax with a very early third. He is getting the +1 air attack as well. He is getting his second Stargate situated. So we know what he is up to, Nate. And Denver should also know that.
It looks like we're going to find out just how far down the rabbit hole really goes, Cats. I'm ready to buckle up. Do you think... There's only one question I need to ask you. We're not getting a queen walk this game, are we?
I sure hope not. But we have seen some queen walks, and if Denver knows that this is a Stargate opening, there is always a chance that he feels like that is one of his better shots. And there is a Roach Warren on the way. So I wouldn't put it past him at this point. I would say it's even likely, because why do you need a Roach Warren? Especially if you anticipate, if you have studied your opponent, you should be anticipating, and you know it's a Stargate opening, right? So you should anticipate that he is not committing for the ground. And so, yeah, I mean, why would you want a Roach Warren there if you're not going to walk him across the map?
Well, and of course, the only reason I asked that is because that's pretty much the one way to bring the game to a conclusion without it reaching that big air army versus a kind of stuffed up and defensive position on the part of the Zerg. So that brings us to the next point of discussion, which might end up being kind of how that played out versus a laser, which was not quite as straightforward as you may have wanted to believe. Yesterday's game that they had on this map went very long and got kind of crazy, as we expected to on Blackburn. Good denial on the gold base, though, Cats.
Yeah, and as the last 30 seconds to a minute transpired, we know now that it is not a Roach Walk or a Queen Walk. There is a Roach Warren, I guess, just for safety, which is commendable, I guess, but there was probably never going to be any reason for you to make any Roaches. Instead, there's going to be a quicker Spire. There haven't been too many Queens produced. I know we see a lot on screen right now, but that's all the Queens out on the map. So Denver just, kind of collapsing with all of his Queens to answer the Void Race. So the Spire is very interesting. It could be tricky enough. There is 700 gas banked up, so he's going to be able to make something like 8 or 9 Muta by the time the Spire is done. Is 8 or 9 Muta going to be enough to take this Void Race? I would say not, unless they commit to fight Queens before that.
Oh, he's going to microwave the Roach Warren. No Roach speed. That's a pretty big pickup. as the gold base is attempting to be secured by MaxPax, getting the flux bands. And I think this is also worth pointing out. The adepts that went into the natural earlier, Cats, I'm pretty sure he should be aware that there was a Spire. So I think Denver, he's probably like, okay, I'm not going to try and catch him off guard with mutas. I'm going to just start building for that late game army composition. But especially since there's no ground threat with the roaches being neutralized in that way, I like that MaxPax is just constantly out here trying to generate value off the Void Rays. Could try to go towards that bottom side. And I mean, Corruptors are being made, but they're not exactly known for their efficacy in dealing with Void Rays.
Yeah, they really are not. I mean, they're not the best unit of choice. What we're going to be looking here for MaxPax is to potentially not use the prismatic alignment onto all of the Void Rays at once the Corruptors are out. He can definitely take this fight against the Queens. One Void Ray will fall. He won't even bother to micro. Now here come the Corruptors, and they just use their prismatic alignment, so he might have to be forced to recall. But before that, he's going to go after the Hatchery. It might be enough, no? And he actually, I'm not sure about this. I guess he judges there's not enough Corruptors here to threaten. But with the rest of them arriving, I guess with Flux Veins, maybe he is still fast enough to just run away and not have to spend that recall as Flux Veins does finish.
Yeah, prismatic alignment did run out, right? Or he canceled it on a few of them, so you have to wait for that cooldown. The reinforcing Void Rays still have it available. And as long as a couple of them can turn on that microwave beam, the Corruptors die pretty much instantly. Their Void Rays are very strong against them. And it's kind of an awkward part. He doesn't have a bunch of spores. He doesn't really have the infrastructure set up to allow him to build up the number of Corruptors that he needs to contest this. And I don't, is it possible that? Yeah, I guess it is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that was a tug of war with a very tight rope there, and you know, like if Denver stabilizes, then we're in for a very long game. But MaxPax was actively reinforcing those Void Rays. The Queens had been taken down already, the Spore fall. So you know, Denver just not having enough Corruptors to deal with the Void Rays, which is often the case when it comes to Corruptors versus Void Rays. But big props to MaxPax because he took a couple of engagements there expertly, right? Like knowing the limitations of his Void Rays. Like it's so difficult to take engagements without prismatic alignment. So him knowing that he could do that was very impressive in its own right. And Denver, I mean, not the best game I think here from him.
No, that's a tough way to lose when we get into those games. And this is kind of interesting because we talk about Sky Toss, we talk about how popular Void Rays are, all those memes, etc. But in the series against the Laser yesterday, MaxPax actually went mostly with ground-based armies. The only game that went big air was the game on Blackburn, and that game went for a really long time. It was crazy long. Carriers running out of interceptors, blah, 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 you know, all sorts of shenanigans. And then this game against Denver, I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, probably, you know, assuming that something crazy doesn't happen, like a bunch of Void Rays just get rallied across the map and kill everything, it should be going to that similar place. And when it comes to late game PvZ these days, Cats, for me, it's a little bit about like the stages of denial, right? Where it's like you're like, oh, okay, no, it's not going to happen, right? We're not going to get there, and then you start bargaining. You're like, well, you know, maybe there'll be a queen walk or something, and it'll force an earlier thing, and eventually you just get to the acceptance of he has 75 spore crawlers. Roddy, would you like to play a game of Parcheesi while we cast this one? And I'm not going to pretend like I'm not happy to see that we get to a little bit of a swifter conclusion on that, but this guy has to be the happiest of all right now. Sitting up 2-0 in blue, the Protoss player from Sidestorm Gaming. He is MaxPax.
And in the top right-hand side, it is for Opon. The last dinosaur, it is Denver. Beckett, we don't see very often, Nate, so that's exciting in its own right.
Yeah, and it's a map that, like, it asks for all this weird stuff. It has the really short rush distance. You have the speed zones, and it just has that general like negative like tag on it. Everybody just always talks down about Beckett. Nobody really ever really has a whole lot of interesting things to say other than what we've already said here, and for good reason. We haven't really had those crazy, weird, interesting games that pop up on this one. And I'm looking back at those games yesterday. MaxPax did win on Beckett against a Laser. They played this one yesterday, so it was trying to remember specifically. This game is a little bit tough, but it didn't end up being crazy long or crazy dynamic, Cats, because it just never really does on this one.
Yeah, I mean, we saw some interesting stuff from Mana, for example, against Raynor, going for very, very quick Tempests on this map, which is a super interesting approach because it is that short rush distance map, so Tempests kind of can double down in defense and offense. And I do think it is the kind of map that lends itself to be strengths of players like MaxPax, even if the Protoss race doesn't feel particularly confident or comfortable on a map like this against Zerg, right? Just because he is the type of player that will play to the map and that will be happy to explore different options and different avenues of playing the game. So I'm very interested actually to see what he brings. And I'm a fan of this map, but I'm always a fan of the weird ones.
Yeah, I wish, I was always of the mind when it came to the map stuff that was like, okay, if you want to try something, if you want to use like a new concept or do something that hasn't really been done before, it's always important to show restraint. And
That was cool.
2 drones at the top of the ramp almost catch that probe. That's pretty beautiful play, because even if he doesn't get it there, the Lings have a lot less time they need to waste chasing it around. But yeah, I've always been like, yeah, it's cool when you do something interesting, but don't make the entire map around the thing that you're trying, right? Like put it as a bit of flavor. You know, it's like, oh, I'm gonna make my first spicy chicken meal. It's like you don't drown it in hot sauce and cayenne pepper, right? You're supposed to season it. You gotta put some other stuff in there too. Keep the variety. You want to have a flavorful dish of a map, cats. You don't want to go, crazy YOLO on the one cool gimmick that's supposed to be designed around it.
Yeah, oftentimes, it's best to mix it up, to kind of throw in little punches and little details that will allow, like those drones that we saw from Denver, right? That is not a usual maneuver because there's not a ramp leading into the third usually as commonly.
Wow.
And this is a good pickoff actually from Denver, picking off the first adept. There is, however, on the other side of the map, already look at that. MaxPax already adapting by having already a battery finished, right? This is not something that we've seen him do on any other map. But on this map, he thinks, hey, if you catch me off guard and you cross the map, you're going to cross the map a lot quicker. That's potentially not going to give me enough time to drop a battery should I ever need it. So he's already preemptive. He's already thinking ahead about things. But unfortunately for MaxPax, there is not going to be any use for that battery in this particular instance.
Yeah, well, I mean, the battery would have been nice if it could have attached itself to that first adept he lost. But otherwise, I completely agree with you. That's bit of a sloppy position, and for MaxPax, it really is. I think you talk about how he's the player that's been improving consistently year over year, season over season. These are the moments that define whether or not you can really establish yourself in that way. And I do mean just being able to be up in a 2-0 position and deal with what's coming your way, to hold out, to get it done, is so big. But it looks like Denver is setting up for a really, really, really big attack. If these adepts get caught in the middle, cats, I'm going to be scared.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a crazy game, a crazy development. There is a lot of adepts, and MaxPax will want to cross the map with them. The problem is for MaxPax is if he runs into those banelings head first, then all of those adepts are going to vanish, and then Denver, like we were talking about on this map in particular, is going to be able to cross so quickly, and he is going for a baneling bust himself. Rest assured, if MaxPax does not attack, I mean, Denver will be committed, I think, to this baneling bust. So this is kind of a double-edged sword. The adepts are the best answer to the links, but the banelings in enough numbers can be incredible. The shade has already been spent, but Denver doesn't want to commit off of creep just yet. He could have maybe gotten us around, but yeah, respect his decision for the time being. I'm not sure that he has revealed the banelings either. So more adepts, the bigger the army gets for MaxPax, the more value these banelings get on defense. Because if you hit this army in the middle, it is gonna turn nasty quickly.
And he throws the shades for it, but finishing that one.
That's it. That's the opportunity. That's go time for Denver. MaxPax does identify it, and the Queen's actually blocking the banelings there for a second. But very good surround from Denver. Now it's go time for him. He has a lot of banelings. He has a lot of links. He's producing a lot more of those. He has 44 workers to 44 workers. The one saving grace for Denver that makes me think maybe you don't need to overcommit to this is that MaxPax doesn't have a third. So maybe Denver can just plan to kind of like just deny this third endlessly. And I don't think MaxPax has any business taking a third right now.
Yeah, that's the most painful part about that. Right as he came in, and you called it, it was the perfect time to do so. Resonating Glaives finished right after all the adepts died. Mm-hmm. So it was literally like an anti-timing that he walked into, did not recognize that there was a gargantuan number of lings that had been produced, and now he's going to go take that third base. There are still a lot of adepts. He does have Resonating Glaives now. And the follow-up to this is a lot like the games that he had against the Laser yesterday. He did this in the first and I believe the third and fourth game, where he went for this adept push into straight away 2 disruptors, then into 3 colossi, and then just rounding it out with a ton of blink stalkers. And it was like a huge blink stalker colossus with a warp prism. Just big push. So I'm kind of expecting that here. We'll see the disruptors used to harass with the gravitic drive. That's the speed boost for the warp prism. So he can go out there, throw those purification novas out 5 times, and he made some really big chunk plays against the lasers. So we'll have to see how well Denver is able to dodge those disruptor balls.
Yeah, I mean, this was brilliant plays from the side of MaxPax. He is going to be adventurous out on the map, but even just the disruptor and its timing, I mean, banelings off of creep are so very difficult to make work against disruptors because they just waddle their way through, and they're so very slow. So like you see here and like you saw previously, those banelings not finding the connections. However, Denver had made so many circlings to attempt at a deny on that third base of MaxPax that this is going to work out fine for him. And I was going to say before the move out, right? Like, as soon as Denver spots the third, he thinks the way that we were thinking earlier, right? Like, he thinks, okay, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead, make a bunch of links and attack into you. But as soon as he sees the first disruptor, he's dissuaded from doing that and instead just decides to sit back. This has been a very mentally intensive game for both of these players. I think the disruptors are only going to find a couple of Ravagers. Those are still expensive units. But yeah, I mean, a lot of really cool decisions being made on either side, and a lot of overextensions as well on either side. So let's see what continues to happen here. The Lynx, really no business going into that shield battery for the time being.
Yeah, I'm pretty confused about why he moved out with everything. I think that was a little bit aggro. I think this is still a little bit aggro. Why not lean on the strengths of the build that he's doing? Get the Colossi out so that the Lings don't become a problem. Do your disruptor drops, throw out the Novas, and just make sure that you're babysitting your Prism. Don't lose that, and let everything else build up back home. Overextension is going to be the word of the day, Cats. And I think that you hit the nail on the head with that. He went way further than he needed to. He brought everything, and he didn't have a way to get those units out. Denver's been sitting on a pretty decent amount of army units this whole game, and he's got plenty of Lings and Roaches and Queens to hold back any sort of middle of the road attack. I think MaxPax is going to want to wait until he at least has a couple of his Colossi, but somebody else has been doing some film study. 8 Mutas.
That's beautiful. I mean, the 8 Mutas could be deadly here on the side of Denver, and we can talk about all of those decisions a little bit later as the game unfolds. The Muta are going to be the crucial part of this. But yeah, I completely agree with you. I think if MaxPax has that information, he never chooses to move out with the army. He has full information. Good disruptor shot, but not as good as it could have perhaps been. On the other side, the Muta are making their way through the left of the map and potentially into the natural of MaxPax. Let's see what's waiting at the natural there. As Neil will show us, there's already a cannon in position, so that'll buy some time for MaxPax to kind of react and reposition his army accordingly. Yeah, let's see.
So of course needs to be careful. The Ling Bane, if it gets the surround on the Stalkers, can still be devastating, and he will end up needing the Stalkers to some degree, as these Mutalisks have reared their ugly faces, Cats. Getting a couple probes between the natural, head over to the main, get a few more, head back to the natural, get a few more. He's actually going to add extra Mutalisks, I think, now that he has seen there are no Stargates. He's like, wait, I don't have to just do 8 Mutas and make him build Phoenix. He can't build Phoenix. He even starts +1 air. Oh, but then he flies directly into the Stalkers. And see, not so bueno.
Such a scary attack from MaxPax. I mean, 3 Colossus and 2 Disruptors. I'm not sure that the ground army of Denver is enough here. That's not the place to morph those mainlings. He's going to have to unmorph those and find a better place for that. So that was a little bit daring to begin with. Now MaxPax coming in strong. Denver looking for an opening here on open grounds. There isn't too many force fields available, but mainlings are terrible against just about everything that MaxPax has. The only good thing is that MaxPax has so much of it that the mainlings are still likely to find value if MaxPax doesn't split. Let's see if that's the case. The force fields are not great, actually. Make all the chokehold for the mainlings to go in, center mass of the army, but it's not going to be enough. MaxPax just has a little bit too much, and the investment to Muta is not going to pay off. The mainlings are going to detonate on a group of Stalkers at the front, but now MaxPax with beautiful splits. He knows that these mainlings are not ever going to be able to clean the entire army unless it is completely clumped up.
At the same time, he's gotten a lot of the pros of the third base during all of this, and even though Denver's army it's a lot of expendable units. He's doing the Zerg style, right? He's just throwing Roaches and Lings at him. He's not really trying to play for big tech. He just wants to overwhelm him with numbers. MaxPax's army is still really scary. If he finds a way to hold the Mutas off, like he has the potential to keep killing crazy amounts with the Colossi getting targeted. Okay, well, as I say that, where did the Prism go? Where were you?
Yeah, there was a Reddit thread on Colossus Micro from MaxPax yesterday. The supply was rather deceitful there because a lot of the difference was in workers, right? Like there is a 47 worker difference. So the army was actually still massive and very difficult to stop from MaxPax, but those two Colossus falling make this extremely, well, a lot better for Denver. MaxPax still has some odds, but I think if Denver just comes back with a Muta and collapses onto this army, he should have this game on lockdown, Nate.
Yeah, that was a beautiful pick off. And I was going to say, I'm like, MaxPax had a gnarly micro yesterday, but did not bring it out with the Colossus push today in this game. And Denver is going to get on the scoreboard, gets his 1 map, Paolo, so far. And we're going to go to a break because that's the end of 3 games. So we are going to return with the conclusion of this series in a few short moments. We'll see y'all soon. Thank you for watching the DreamHack Masters. We'll be right back. The only thing better than reaching the end of the week and a nice couple of days of chilling, maybe having a mojito on the porch, is watching StarCraft on your Friday. And we are here to bring you all of the action that you could possibly dream of. Welcome back to the DreamHack Masters. We are literally in the loading screen to game number 4, cats.
It should be a good game. The loading screen was beautiful, Nate. And now we are in. So spawning in the bottom left-hand side of the map, it is the Madman, MaxPax.
And his opponent in the Northeast, able to pick up that little dub on Beckett. the red Zerg player hailing from France. He is Denver.
It's been a strange day so far, Nate, because a lot of the time we are talking about what we see on screen, but a lot of what has happened in these in this first couple of series of today has happened off of screen. A lot of the decisions and the interesting gameplay has happened off of screen, right? So like last game, for example, and I said that we would talk about it. So while the early game is slower, I do want to mention a few things. There was a time where Denver was making that Ling Bane as potentially an answer to the Adepts or potentially a Ling Bane bust on the other side of the map, right? Commendable, cool. He gets rid of the Adepts, then he crosses the map. He sees that there's no opportunity for damage, but he still has a lot of Ling Bane, so he thinks, I'm gonna deny the third base, right? And at that point, he stops making Zerglings, he stops making Banelings, starts droning up because he sees no third. He's just like, I'm going to catch up in economy. That is the one advantage that I have, is kind of like the terrain, even though they were even on workers at that point. But then MaxPax takes a very gutsy third, and Denver scouts it a little bit later, right? Like a little bit after he takes it. As soon as he scouts it, he stops making drones, and he fires up something like 18 Zerglings, if I recall correctly. So he wants to collapse onto that third, right? But the cool thing about MaxPax is that there was a tiny window for sure where Denver could have just outright denied that third and maybe gotten a huge advantage in the game by killing the Adepts that were at the third. But that was a tiny window because MaxPax was planning for Disruptors, which was an incredibly cool decision because you're looking for those Banelings that are extremely difficult to split and extremely slow off of creep. And you know that that is the main or only weapon that your opponent has to deny your third, predominantly, because if it's just Links, the Adepts should deal with that. Right, so when the Disruptor pops up and kills the first bunch of Banelings, then Denver starts droning up again. So he shifts for like the third time in a row his focus from army to drones and from army to drones and so on and so forth, and starts droning up again because he thinks, okay, well, I'm not gonna run slow Banelings into Disruptors. But MaxPax didn't know, Nate, that Denver had already made the extra 18 Zerglings, and I think that's why we see him move out. Because if Denver had just been droning up, I think that attack looks a lot better for him with the Disruptors and the Adepts. So, yeah, that was very interesting. Again, I think if MaxPax had full information of, the changes in kind of philosophy for Denver to approach that game, he would never move out. But, yeah, did give a little bit of an advantage for Denver, only to take it back later.
Yeah, he wasn't really able to get a good read on the situation. And I think that's why we saw the overextension. And yeah, I'm not gonna like really get too nitpicky about it because it's still 2-1. If he loses this game, then I think we start to look back at some of the other decision making and be like, okay, well, trying to close it out as early as he did, it might have been the reason why he doesn't win the match at all anymore, right? So the way that this game plays out is going to heavily dictate the rest of the story, I suppose. Because a 3-1 is going to be way different than if he has to wrestle this one out in a final decider match where Denver is also on match point. So don't want to give up too many of those opportunities, but I can see what you mean with like he thought that there wouldn't be enough of an economic investment early to get that out, or he was still building the drones. But on such a short map and moving out with those forces, any time that you get caught on Beckett, like the time it takes for them to get back over to your base is so much faster than on any other map. It's almost impossible to get the production done in time for a defense. Like your defender's advantage is just so diminished by how easy it is to get to your base.
Yeah, completely agreed. I mean, there was never a sentry produced in the early game of that game, so MaxPax was really just working with whatever his best judgment was, and Denver has been so unpredictable that it's difficult to blame him. And he still put himself in a winning position, I think, right? Like that push, like he was like 60 supply behind, but it was, I mean, his army was still massive, was still way stronger compositionally than Denver's. If he doesn't lose to those Colossus, I think that game can still go very much either way, if not just straight up MaxPax winning right there and then. So, yeah, a few things going the way of Denver in that last game, but I'm not sure that that's replicable for the rest of the series, because MaxPax has certainly looked like the stronger player otherwise.
Now these two Oracles coming back over towards the third one. Very low, very low.
Very low.
What do we... 7 hit points. So a strong gust of wind could knock that one out of the sky. Got to be careful. And that second target that we were talking about is now done with that +1 attack that was researched. The third base, well situated. The Adept, not on hold position, actually does kind of come out, but doesn't end up being a huge deal as the Void Ray is there. And there's only like 4 Zerglings. So I don't believe there was really ever any threat other than maybe a probe getting dived on. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't expect this, but Cats, there's some things that when I hear them, I lock onto them in my mind. And a couple, I think it was a week or two ago, you told me that this map is just not the map for the Queen Walks. It's not the obvious map for it. So MaxPax must be aware of that as well. And he's thinking to himself, okay, I can just go straight to air because I don't think I'm going to have much to worry about this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to see a return of that style that was so fruitful for him. I mean, we haven't even seen it play out because Denver, last time this happened, he just died to the Void Rays, right? So I cannot blame MaxPax for doing something like this. He's basically saying, hey, like, even if the Void Rays are dealt with, that was never meant to kill Denver, right? Like, he just kind of died because his response, probably MaxPax would evaluate, wasn't great. This Adept Shade also not great. Kind of in the middle of the drone line, and Denver does capitalize. Will lose a couple of workers, of course, for his trouble. Maybe too many, actually. 11 have gone down with the Oracle help as well as this Void Ray poking elsewhere. But yeah, the Shades, regardless, not the best. Still, this time, Denver adapting, going for the Hydras, a much better option, at least if your goal is to survive the start of the game here.
Yeah, especially since going for the Corruptors on Blackburn, we saw MaxPax, because he goes directly into Flux Veins and builds a lot of Void Rays. This isn't like, oh, I'm going to build 4 or 5 Void Rays and then just go straight to carriers and turtle up. No, he won on Blackburn as quickly as he did. I think because Denver wasn't expecting that it would just be, oops, all Void Rays. He wasn't really looking too deep into the game. He's still getting the late game stuff, but he'll be as aggressive as Denver lets him be. And these Hydras, as you said, good answer.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. It's so counterintuitive to go Corruptors against Void Rays, but the decision from Denver is probably expecting that there won't be that many Void Rays. One will get taken down, the other ones will escape onto the high ground. There's no vision there for Denver, so the second one will survive. But yeah, I think you're spot on there. I think that Denver probably thinks there's not going to be that many Void Rays produced, so if I can get enough Corruptors to kill these Void Rays to punish them, then all of a sudden the Corruptors are fantastic because whatever's left over is going to deal very well with Tempests or with Carriers, which should be the transition. So you can kind of see his thought process in the previous game. Doesn't end up working out. This game, very different, however, as Denver's going to be on the aggression with Hydras and Banelings. On the other side, there will be Tempests, one of the best defensive units that Protoss can have at this stage, as well as a crap ton of static defense.
Yeah, this is a crucial moment. All of the queens are here. There's a ton of energy on them as well, so we should expect to see some of the transfuse action come down. And there's just so many Hydralisks that DPS is redonkulous. And going for the Tempest, like you were talking about, you have the long range, can be used for siege, also strong anti-siege. The problem is, even as this army is forced to kite back a little bit by bit, eventually that Nexus and the probes become a target, so you really need to make it strong stand here. Next Tempest is going to come out, but the Hydra's starting to get close enough to attack. He actually has gone through most of the Hydras, and the Nexus has a lot of health, so the possibility of cleaning this up remains very much so on the table, and actually already starts to pull the Hydralisks back a little bit. The Queens, there is no saving them. Really good control out of MaxPax. I think it would have been, if he had just tried to fight straight up, the opportunity, if you get